question is something that struck me. Given that it is an academic work, both of you are renowned scholars and very extensively published, I was surprised that you said that there were no footnoting, that there are no references. I'm very curious as to why you made that decision, and why there is no linkage to other authors and works, and in that, because that would be the general nature of an academic piece. So I'd like that question answered.
Thank you. The question was about why we, both academicians with some track record, decided not to have footnotes in the book. This is the question of marketing and of reaching out. I believe if we have not annotated bibliography for this book, it will be that thick volume that has to be published as an addendum to this book. There is enormous amount of literature that is behind each and every word in the book. Really amazing. I'll give you one example, if you want, just very briefly, for you to understand what's going on. But this book has a list of suggested readings, and each and the logic of this further reading list follows the logic of the chapters. So you'll open this list and you'll see that for chapter this and that you have this 7-8 monographs that you can take. Of course, this book was oriented toward the English language readers, so most sources that are here in the list of suggested reading are in English. So regarding the question why, because we wanted to reach out to you. If this book is a footnoted book, we would not be able to publish it in that beautiful format, and I don't think the book would have this kind of outreach. For us, for Professor Magachi and me, outreach was absolutely a key point. We wanted to make sure that you folks read that, right? And I'll give you a funny example. My previous book, The Golden Age Shtetl, that I wrote for really lay reader, let me put it this way. And the book won the National Jewish Book Award, and the book, they sold enormous amount of copies, Princeton University Press. When I was trying to find a publisher for the book, I went to Basic Books, they told me no. I went to Vintage Press, no. I went to Free Press, no. So I tried all commercial presses in the United States. And then I came to a person who single-handedly manages the Jewish book market in the United States. It's a she, and she's a very influential lady. And she gave me 30 seconds to tell her what my book is about. And in this 30 seconds, I inadvertently mentioned that the book has footnotes. Her response was this, quote unquote, footnotes? Amcha does not buy books with footnotes. Amcha is a Hebrew Yiddish expression for your people. And she's of course Jewish, so she told me, your people do not buy books with footnotes. You want to reach out to the Jewish audience, you should have no footnotes in the book. So that was one of the lessons that I learned, working on the previous book. It's market.
There was a question right here, sir.
Can you give us a demographic context over the last 100 years in Ukraine? Numbers of Jews, number of Ukrainian, numbers of other minorities, and how it's changed over that period, so we have a bit of context.
Right.
Do you want to do this, or you want a couple more?
I'll take a couple more.
Okay, so they have a demographic question. Next. Professor Darewych.
I'd like to ask you about whether there were things that are in the book. I must first tell you I haven't read it yet, on which you differ. Which ones were the ones where you differed most, and how did you resolve them, or did you just leave it as it is, as a difference?
Thank you. I'll take one more question.
One more for the moment in this batch. Sir. So we have a demographic question. We have views of potential
Thank you very much for your
authors? And the third question?
Thank you very much for your stimulating talk. And how much did you both derive from the work of Leonid, Feinberg, and Myroslav Marynovych in Ukraine, who basically have been working in this area since '91 and probably earlier?
I'll probably start with the easy question, which was the last question. Leonid Feinberg is a sociologist, and his most important works were published not after the 1990s, but before. Feinberg was famous among the narrow circles of dissident-minded Kievans as a person who wrote in the late 1970s a brochure where he proved that ruble, Karbobinets, is a fiction. And that was quite an interesting insight. Feinberg is the director of, just for us to know, of the Judaica Institute in Ukraine. He's a manager. He publishes books as the co-owner of the Duch i Litera publishing house, which is part of the publishing house of Kiev Mohila Academy. If you look at what Feinberg does over the last 20 years, he does mostly sociological analysis of the current situation in Ukraine. I can't say that either Bob or I are influenced by him because he's, I think I'm not saying anything that somehow humiliates him, but he is a sociologist with economic background. He's not a scholar, he's not a doctor, he's not a professor, but he does very interesting research, and we know about this research, right? Myroslav Marynovych, who is one of the leading people at the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv, is a major dissident, very influential thinker. I can say that I'm influenced by his essays of the 1970s, 1980s, that also circulated in Samizdat, as I'm influenced, let's say, by Ivan Zuba. But as scholars, we are distancing ourselves from the people who we study simply to keep the balance. That's something very important. Objectivity means that we allow ourselves to be influenced, but we need to keep distance and not, when we are immersing in the material, also remember that we have to be neutral in many different cases and not allow emotions to drive us. Thank you. Right, Bob? Okay. Very emotional. Second question was about the differences between Paul Robert Magachi and me in our approach to contentious matters that we were discussing. Of course they were. Of course they were. But I think these were not differences between us, but differences among the scholars around us, of which we were well aware. And this is much more important. We were trying to report or to convey these differences in opinions by creating in the book, I believe it was Professor Magachi's know-how, what we call text inserts. So let's say there is a question on collaboration of certain Ukrainians with auxiliary police during the Holocaust. Instead of saying, this is what we think about it, we say, these are 7 scholars who are top-notch scholars in the field who are working with the recently discovered primary sources in Ukrainian language, in German language, in Ukrainian archives, in German and Polish archives. And this is what they say. And we are giving them a possibility to say what they think. In a very brief text insert in the book. So that was the way to deal with differences. There were some stylistic differences because, you cannot compare a person who wrote 37 books to a person who wrote 7 books, right? So when we had stylistic differences, I allowed Professor Magachi to, cross some of my not needed definite articles. Yes, yes. Finally, this questions about statistics and demography. There is a very detailed description of statistics and demography in the book. I don't think it's reasonable for me to, I don't want to sound like a bore, let me just tell you that right now we also have this vision of the problematics of statistics. I believe it was Benjamin Disraeli who used to say there are 5 different types of lies, and one of them is statistics. But the question is how you count, who you count, at what time you count. We cannot send statisticians into the 1900s to do the statistics. When the Russian Empire sent its statisticians to do the first huge, very important census that produced about 90 volumes of documents in 1897, these people were trained in a certain way, they were asking certain questions, and they were expecting to get certain answers. We can question the way they assemble statistics. But what we know now is that we have about 46 to 47 million Ukrainians right now, so it's the entire population of Ukraine. And Jews, according to different scholars engaged in that particular statistical analysis and of what is going on in Ukrainian demography, they say there are anywhere between 90 to 170,000 Jews in Ukraine. So that's what we are talking about today.
Okay, so those are the 3. Yes, ma'am. So I can't see without my glasses. And I can't hear anyway. So it's great. But that's Marta Olynyk. Great translator. Please.
Dr. Petrovsky-Shtern, a question for you. Do you have any plans to write a monograph devoted to Symon Petliura?
Let me take a couple of other questions. I'll think meantime.
And then where else did I see a hand? Yes, way back. Microphone man on the other extreme.
Your book is called Jews and Ukrainians. Professor, aren't the Jews Ukrainians? And aren't you making them the other yourself?
One more, perhaps, at this round. Yes, sir, right here, please. The microphone will come to you so that we can share your whatever you're going to say, because it's really difficult to hear in the rest of the room.
Gentlemen, I'm curious if, and you probably didn't, but I'm curious if the book deals at all in the end with the present cultural and political situation in Ukraine.
Okay.
Good.
You know, Jews read from right to left. Let me start. I'll say the last question, I'll go forward. Okay? Yes, the book has a final chapter in which present-day political, cultural, demographic issues are discussed from Ukrainian and from Jewish perspective. So this is, I believe, we wanted to bring the book as close to today as possible. And you know, it's difficult to write the history when it is unfolding in front of your eyes. It's difficult to be sitting in the cozy office in Toronto or in Chicago and see how Israelis are helping Ukrainians on the Maidan, right? Or to read about Yelena Feinberg, the wife of Leonid Feinberg, mentioned above, who is single-handedly managing all the, so to say, ad hoc Red Cross issues on the Maidan for the Ukrainians and everybody else who is there. So yes, we did discuss that, and you will find it in the book. 2, are Jews Ukrainians? Well, look, the question, that's a very good question. I'll tell you why. Professor of McGill University, it's still Canada. Professor Gershon David Hundert started his career many years ago writing a groundbreaking article about Jews in Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in the 17th, 18th century. What was the title of the article? Jews and Other Poles. So, of course, when we look at geography, when we discuss geographic identities, we must say, yes, Jews are Ukrainians. I'm absolutely with you. But in addition to geographic identity, there is also ethnic identity and cultural identity. So a person cannot be defined according to only one identity he or she has. If you define me according to my religious identity, you'll say, oh, he is this kind of an ultra-Orthodox schmuck from West Forges Park in Chicago. You would not know that I'm actually an observant heretic, right? So you have to look into different identities to understand what's going on. That was the last joke. Regarding the book, regarding a possibility to write a book on Petliura and the Jews. Well, the disciple of Professor Magachi, Henry Hillel Abramson, published a book, Prayer for the Government. The first very important book on Ukrainians and Jews was published by Harvard University Press in 1999. And the book has at least 2 chapters, Marta, covering this issue, Petliura and the Jews. There are things with which I agree in the book. There are theoretical things with which I disagree. But I want to mention that Henry Abramson was the person who gave me my first prayer book and gave me my first yarmulke. So I am nothing in comparison to the level where he was in 1991, okay? So I owe to him quite a lot, and I owe to his understanding, his vision of how to discuss Ukrainian Jewish issues. So he has the material covered. Between his dissertation and 1999, Professor from Kiev, Volodymyr Sergeychuk, published a book, Petliura and the Jews, in Ukrainian language, and it's a very one-sided, not balanced book. So he basically says Petliura was good to the Jews, and he doesn't address the complexity of the issue. So yes, we do need a monograph on that particular subject matter, but frankly, I prefer to have my doctorate student writing a dissertation on that, because I have my 25-year plan carved in stone, and I cannot deviate. I can only do that much in my life. I would love to do other things, but I'm not planning to write it right now. But there is a need of such a book, because if you remember the conversation on Petliura and the Jews precisely on this subject matter sparked a new stage in Ukrainian Jewish conversation in the 1960s when Zoshin Chekhovsky and Taras Grigorovich Hunchak published 2 views in the journal Jewish Social Studies. So these are also people who started this conversation, and it was mostly about very bitter animosity and very little understanding how to approach the subject matter. Okay, today we have a benefit of multiplicity of methodologies. We know how to deal with the subject matter. We need somebody to take methodology, to look at the subject matter, and come out with a book.
Actually, I have decided I'm not saying anything because I'm not the speaker today, though there are allusions to things, but I will just say one thing because I may say something tomorrow, because tomorrow is a seminar and I could be asked, but maybe some of you will not be here tomorrow, but this very important question, aren't Jews Ukrainians? Let me answer it in another way.
Hold on a second, though. The floor is yours.
You notice how we get along. May I, sir, continue? Everyone living on the territory of Ukraine today is Ukrainian. There are Ukrainians of Polish heritage, there are Ukrainians of Jewish heritage, there are Ukrainians of Carpatho-Rusin heritage. I was going to say Crimean Tatar, and notice that slip, Freudian slip. There are Ukrainians of various heritages, and hence what was not mentioned here, and you will notice in this book, there are also Ukrainians of ethnic Ukrainian heritage. And in this book, always is referred to not simply Ukrainians, but ethnic Ukrainians. Why? Because this book is about just two of the many peoples living on the territory of Ukraine, and to distinguish between everybody who's Ukrainian and those who are specifically of ethnic Ukrainian background. That's why we use the term. Sir, now I go back to my other role here. Sir.
I guess it's a bit following your last comment. Obviously, identity is conveyed by geographical or historical roles, but what interests me the most, I guess, are the cultural identities. So could you tell me how exactly Tevye the milkman is Ukrainian?
Okay.
Very specific.
Yeah.
Please, sir, right here, sir. The microphone is on its way.
Just to comment on your last comments about who's Ukrainian. I think that in the Ukraine and in Poland, and in fact in the whole of Eastern Europe, Jews were not Poles nor Ukrainians. Jews were Jews, and Ukrainians were Ukrainians, and Poles were Poles. In fact, in Canada, I'm from Poland. In Canada, I'm known as a Pole. I spent a year in Israel, and I was known as an Anglo-Saxon. The only place where I was a Jew was in Poland. And I believe that that is also true of the Ukraine, not the Ukraine that you envisage in your book, but the Ukraine as it existed when thousands upon thousands of Jews lived in Ukraine before they were murdered. The other comment I'd like to make is that this discussion that is going on here this evening is very helpful and certainly commendable, but it could only happen in this country, in this city. I don't think that this conversation would take place today in Eastern Europe, including the Ukraine, and so that is a positive thing. But at the same time, perhaps you'll excuse me if I've been poisoned by previous propaganda, but as I'm listening to this glorious history, I can't forget what has been taught to me, what I have witnessed, what I've seen. I mean, I cannot forget the fact that it was mostly Ukrainians in black uniforms who guarded the Warsaw Ghetto and were shooting in the Warsaw Ghetto. I can't forget Wynnyckyj or Petliura or any of those.
Have you seen him?
Have I seen him? It's hard to forget the fact that John Demjanuk and so many others guarded Sobibor, where my family perished. So as much as I admire what you're trying to do with this book, how do I get this poison in me out? How do I negate that and say, yeah, let's all dance together now?
Fine, good. Okay, so let's address these points.
Thank you. I really appreciate what you asked. And I even more appreciate the question that you asked at the end. How do you get this poison out? I can't say that this is an antidote, but I do recommend reading it from the beginning to the end and writing a message, or many messages, to Paul Robert Margaci and me asking other questions. Because I think if you are asking a question after making this kind of statement, there is a hope that we will be able to explain something to you. And let me talk to several points that you made. I will start with a minor one. I think it's an insult to address Ukraine today with a definite article. After 1991, this is an independent country. In the English language, which is my 7th or 8th language, so I'm allowed to make mistakes, definite article is put before the countries that are abbreviated: the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, okay, the United States. But if you have an independent country as one word, you do not use a definite article before it, because if you do, you reduce this country to an addendum, to a colony. Ukraine is not a colony. It's an independent country. It's an independent polity after 1998. 2. Approximately from 1993, sometimes once a year, but in most cases 2, sometimes 4 times a year, I'm going to Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk, Lviv, Chernivtsi, Kyiv to teach Jewish history, Jewish studies, Ukrainian Jewish history, and Ukrainian and Jews. 1993, I was addressing a huge crowd of secondary school teachers in Dnipropetrovsk who came to learn about the Holocaust. Ukrainians, all of them, ethnic Ukrainians. In 2015, thank Ukrainian Jewish Encounter, I was able to teach at Lviv Catholic University, where I have about 15, 16, 17 master PhD students, all of them ethnic Ukrainians, who are learning about Jewish history and culture in Ukraine. In 2008, 11, 14, 16, I was teaching and giving lectures to Kyiv Mohila Academy, where I teach about different aspects of Jewish culture in East Europe. Your vision of the possibility to have this kind of conversation only in this country is simply not true. I do believe that a possibility to have this kind of conversation in Ukraine was created after 1991, and we owe Ukrainian independence that we can have this very serious discussion on various levels: academic, public, media, newspapers, books in Ukraine. On any level, you can discuss Ukrainian Jewish issues. They are not only discussed, they are taught. Different Jewish languages are taught. Different aspects of Jewish culture are taught. There is a very deep and serious engagement of Ukrainians of different descent, Jews, but mostly ethnic Ukrainians, toward Jewish culture in East Europe and Jewish Ukrainian issues. Returning to Tevye, that was an interesting subject. I still don't know how I'm going to answer this question. First, there are several Tevyes. Let me remind you. There is Tevye of the movie, which has little to do with the actual sequel that Sholem Aleichem wrote for the Yiddish newspapers. But if we combine both, we'll find out that Tevye is singing Ukrainian songs, that Tevye is using Ukrainian words, and that Tevye is talking to a person who is his one and most important interlocutor. It's a cow. And cow cannot be Jewish, it's Ukrainian.
Thou ask and thou receive. There's a question here, and then Professor Galadza.
Thank you very much. I like the concept of your book. The subject matter is so problematic that you simply can't, reduce things to a specific, simple answer. So I like the idea that you have presented various points of view and left the conclusion up to the reader. My question is a bit of a follow-up to the gentleman in the red t-shirt who just spoke. Are there any plans to present this book in other languages? I think it's very convenient that you have English as a common language because it's the international language today, but it seems to me it would be very helpful in Ukraine and perhaps even other countries.
Thank you. I'll take 2 more questions.
Professor Galadza?
Yeah, I don't think I need a mic. I mean, obviously, congratulations. I mean, this is quite the event.
No, actually, you know what? You do need a mic.
Okay.
Because there are somebody.
No, that's
more
good.
that
No,
can hear,
usually,
and it's on its way.
my wife looks for my mute button, so that's why I'm on. Anyway, congratulations. Obviously, a very significant achievement, and I don't want to detract from the congratulations by posing a question which may seem either pedantic or critical. And I wouldn't even have this question except that I realize the book is going to be so popular that I better run out during the talk and buy it. And so I was listening, but I was also leafing through the book. And as I say, I do not want to sound critical at all. In fact, the only reason I'm posing this is because I'm sure you're going to get questions on this time and time again. Bob has reproduced one of his fantastic maps. We all owe so much to Bob Maguchi's phenomenal cartography. But on page 72, there's a map, and you know how it is. Most people will look at the pictures first, right? Which is why I started looking at the text, and I'm not, I don't want to say that I'm not consoled, but I haven't found what I'm looking for. Anyway, the map on page 72 says Murder of Jews in Ukraine, 1941 to 1944. And there's a star that designates mass murder sites. And my math is not always, I had to become a priest because my math was so bad, but there are about, I've counted about 25 stars and mass murder sites. Now we all know, and this has become very, very, famous, very, something, very, very well known in the last couple of years because of the work of Father Petro the Holocaust by bullets. I mean, there are hundreds upon hundreds of mass murder sites. Somebody can correct me, but it's around 1,000 if I'm not mistaken. So someone will know here, okay? And for me personally, this is an issue. Some of us are working on the Jewish cemetery in Zambia, and I just learned that the place where my parents are from, Petliura, where my own uncle stood up in a tower and cried as from the other side of the town as he looked and saw Jews being lined up and murdered. There is absolutely nothing being done in Petliura to memorialize the Jews, which at one time were 50% of the population. Anyway, I could keep on going. I think somebody's trying to tell me to.
But I'm saying it's not true.
What about Petliura?
Yeah.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. I was talking to my cousin from Petliura, and anyway.
I'll give you another name.
Anyway, but my question to you is the following. I mean, just because people are going to ask the question, what's the story on mass murder sites? Why so few? And I don't see any reference in the index in the back to Petit Desbois. It was pretty prominent.
There was, what was the other question?
Translations.
Yeah. Okay, one more question. Yeah, this is Professor Fox, please.
My question involves, since this book addresses laymen like myself on this topic, and you began with Babyn Yar and it's come back in this Holocaust of bullets way as well. So we in the West knew first about Babyn Yar through Evtushenko's poem, No Monuments. So I'd like you to address the question of no monuments and what's happening around that. And then take a unique moment that involves our meeting before we met, when you were still a librarian in Kiev, or working in the library. And I asked you about some Geniza fragments, and you managed to get me copies. I don't know if that would almost gotten you into jail.
Okay, actually there were two questions from the folks, so I'll try to address all of them. But let me start with easy questions first. This book has been issued on September 11th in the Ukrainian language. The Ukrainian edition of the book is 30 pages longer because that was written for the English language audience, and in order to address certain issues, to convey certain issues to the Ukrainian readers, Prof. Myroslav and I added here and there a couple of contextual remarks to bring the reader into the discussion. The book is in the same format, same 350 illustrations, and the book is already being presented and sold in Ukraine, and the book won a special prize of the president of the Lviv Book Forum in mid-September 2016. So unlike the English version of the book, the Ukrainian version of the book is already an award winner. I am responsible for bringing the book in Hebrew version to the Israeli readers, and I'm negotiating with a number of publishers in Israel a possibility to have the Hebrew version of the book for the Israeli readers. So that would be the next step. I believe I'm answering the question about the languages, the book in other languages. Killing sites. I would like to delegate this question to you, but I believe.
I'll do it real quick.
Really? Okay. And then I'll.
The quick answer to that is actually the art of map making. The worst thing is with maps, as with anything, is too much information. So the greatest challenge to make a map is not to put everything you know on it, but to select. Because if you do not, then you see nothing. And it's interesting when the map that you singled out is actually, I think, one of the worst maps in the book. Why? Because it's got too much information on it already. So the simple answer to your question is, these are select. Perhaps I could have just on the index said, select mass killing sites, but they're obviously not all of them because you can't do it on a map this size. So it's a simple, of course there are many more, but you got to decide on some. The message, however, is there. There are mass killing sites. That's the real message.
And I believe, thank you very much, Mr. Myroslav. I would add two very brief points. When we talk about the sites of mass murder of the Jews in Ukraine, Jews who go to this or that site do not see any monument. They say, why? There is nothing there. It is not a problem of Ukrainian-Jewish relations. It's a problem of Ukrainian-Ukrainian relations. It's a problem of the relation between Ukraine and its own memory. There were sites in Ukraine where Poles were massacred. There were sites in Ukraine where Russians, Jews, and whoever else were massacred in 1937. Some of these sites have only recently been discovered, like this infamous forest in the western outskirts of Kiev, near Darnice, where people started to place memorial plaques homemade just on the trees because they realized this is the place of a major site. So Ukraine only now acquired an opportunity to come to grips with its own past, and it takes time. When you're saying why there was no monument in this or that shtetl, in this or that town, we have to answer a very simple question. In the 1990s, people were finding money, trying to scratch the surface to find money and buy half a loaf of bread. Forget about, commemorating their own relatives killed there, let alone the Jews. And I would like to end up this conversation, answering this particular question. I cannot end up this conversation. It's a very important conversation. I'm ready to talk to you about it later. In about 2001, I got a postcard with an image of Podhaitsi. It was signed by Professor Taras Grigorovich Hunchak, who was a very important, still is very important. He's an emeritus professor of Rutgers University, and he is perhaps one of the most important connoisseurs of Ukrainian political history and of the history of Ukrainian political thought in the world. He sent me the postcard with the greetings before the Jewish New Year. Why me? Why Professor Hunchak? Well, we sing Ukrainian songs together sometimes at the conference, big deal. So why Podhaitsi with Jewish cemetery, with the images of Jewish cemetery? And then Taras Grigorovich called me, and he told me two stories. One of them was about him, 7 years old boychik, living in Podhaitsi, who was asked by his father to go to the Jewish ghetto and bring notes. And he was the mailman, bringing notes from people who are in the forest to the people who are in the ghetto. And then, one day, he was playing soccer, with other kids. And they heard machine guns. They didn't realize what it was. Only later, when he came back and realized there is no ghetto in the town, in this shtetl, he asked his father what was going on. Many years later, his father told him what had been going on at that time. And through all his life, he feels shame that he was playing soccer when Jews were massacred outside the ghetto. The shame of Professor Hunchak is the best monument for Jews in Podhaitsi that I can imagine. Although there is absolutely not his fault, and we cannot even discuss the fault of, or the shame of the 6-year-old Ukrainian boy from Podhaitsi. Returning to the question on Yevtushenko and monuments in the Babyn Yar. The Babyn Yar has now many monuments. One of them, still there, replaced the stela that was placed by the Soviet authorities. Here in this place, a monument to 100,000 Soviet citizens murdered here by the Nazis will be established. There is an official Soviet monument established in 1974. There is a menorah. It's not really a monument. It's a memorial statue established in 1991. There is a monument to the children, not necessarily Jewish children, but to the children. Very moving monument in the Babyn Yar. There are several crosses in the Babyn Yar at the places where prominent Ukrainian nationalists were shot by the Nazis, including Olena Teliga, a prominent Ukrainian literary figure and a poet. Several Ukrainian priests who were murdered. There is a chapel on the side of Babyn Yar where these priests were shot by the Nazis. This is done spontaneously by different groups. Different groups claim their right to memory of the Babyn Yar. This is again the problem of Ukraine with Ukraine, of Ukrainians with Ukrainians. I do think that there should be some planning, there should be some organization, but none of the groups wanted to acknowledge the right of the other group to have this site marked by that. Only I have. This is my memory. You just get out of here. I think it's wrong. I think the reconciliation of the society with itself will bring a new development here. There is a very serious discussion between the Ukrainian Jewish encounter and other people involved how to make this site into a site of many people who were murdered, but Jews to begin with. And this is an ongoing conversation. So as we talk, there is a discussion of how to do that in the form that would be not disruptive, but encompassing. I hope I'm presenting.
Not only an ongoing conversation, but actually an international competition for landscape design, which was held and with concrete proposals. And also, we don't want to overburden this event, but the simple answer to your question, just appeared in September last month, a 400-page book on Babyn Yar, the English edition, Ukrainian edition, and it's not only about what transpired at Babyn Yar during World War II, which is a major component of it, but it's really about Babyn Yar before Babyn Yar and Babyn Yar after Babyn Yar, from World War II to the present, with all of this discussion and photograph of all of these monuments and controversies, etc. And for those of you who come tomorrow, I didn't want to mix things up, but maybe I'll have 1 or 2 copies of this book, Babyn Yar, for those of you who would really want it.
Thank you very much. I forgot about the competition. Yeah. Last part of your question regarding the Geniza fragments, regarding the manuscripts that are there but not available. They are there but not microfilmed. Again, this is a problem of the pattern of who is in charge of the collection, who is in charge of the library. Unfortunately, the same person who was there in 1993 is still in charge of the library. And the old dinosaurs of the communist era have to go. I would send a message to the former President Yanukovych asking him, could you please take Mr. Onishchenko with you and never bring him back, right? This is a person who is, I'm talking about the director of the National Library in Kiev, the Wynnyckyj Library, who is a person whom I would not ask to be a tractor mechanic, because he would not be able to manage the job, the task. So this person is still at the head of the National Library. It's a shame, but he is a protege of Mr. Patton, and Mr. Patton is about Ukrainian armored vehicles, and when you get to this point, the conversation is stopped, right? So the old generation of people who did not allow scholars to do what scholars should do should go. And this is not about Ukrainians and Jews, it's about Ukrainians and Ukrainians. It's about Ukraine coming to grips with what it is and making a change.
For your coming here, but most importantly, let me first say one small announcement, and that is for any of you who are still interested in this topic, to actually hear the opinions of people who have read the book. Tomorrow afternoon, on the back of this yellow card, there is a seminar that begins, I believe, at 5 o'clock. 4 o'clock at the Monk Center, to which you're cordially invited, and you will hear opinions of people, as I say, who have actually read the book and not just come to listen to our speaker. And most importantly, I guess it's obvious we've had I don't want to use the word wonderful, intellectually magnificent afternoon by listening to somebody who is a thoughtful person who expresses insights where many of us would not see them, and who is an ultimate liberal, tolerant individual coming from a part of the world that is multicultural, like most parts of the world, all of which is was evident from this afternoon. So on your behalf, I really wish to thank Professor Yohanan Petrovsky-Shtern, and you'll be able to hear him tomorrow as well.